She tried to discredit him on live TV. His response changed everything. The email arrived late in the afternoon, a short, formal message from the producers of the Morning Exchange, one of the most watched talk shows in the country. They wanted Marcus Steele, tech entrepreneur and CEO of Next Gen Solutions, to be a guest on their upcoming segment about diversity in business. Marcus had seen this play before, a mainstream platform suddenly remembering black entrepreneurs exist, trotting them out for a few minutes of applause before moving on to the next trending topic. But this was different. Next Gen wasn't some upstart. They had just secured a $250 million defense contract, outbidding some of the biggest names in the industry. That wasn't luck. It was 2 decades of relentless work. Still, Marcus hesitated before accepting. Something felt off. His assistant, Lena, picked up on his hesitation. "You sure you want to do this? You know how these shows are. They love a success story, but they love tearing one down even more." Marcus leaned back in his chair, his expression calm but resolute. "I'll handle it. Besides, it's national exposure. Let's see what they have to say." Lena exhaled, shaking her head. "Just don't let them bait you." He nodded, though deep down, he knew the game. If this interview was a setup, they were playing chess with the wrong man. The morning of the interview, Marcus arrived at KXN Studios in Los Angeles. The air in the green room was cool, sterile. A young producer greeted him, barely looking up from her clipboard. "Mr. Steele, thanks for being here. We'll mic you up in 5. No small talk, no warm-up. Just in and out, like a transaction. As he sat in the makeup chair, an assistant powdered his face with practiced indifference. The monitor on the wall showed the live broadcast of the show, a panel segment on celebrity scandals, followed by a cooking demo, then a transition card. Coming up next, the black tech boom. Is it talent or special treatment? Marcus clenched his jaw. So this was the angle. But if they thought they had the upper hand, they were in for a surprise. What he didn't realize was just how far they were willing to go. The set of the Morning Exchange was designed to look inviting. Soft blues and golds, a glass coffee table between the host's chair and the guests. Cameras hovered like silent observers, capturing every movement, every expression. Marcus adjusted his suit jacket as he took his seat across from Victoria Lane, the show's lead anchor. A seasoned journalist with a reputation for asking tough questions, she smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Marcus Steele," she began, her voice smooth and practiced. "CEO of Next Gen Solutions, a true American success story." Marcus gave a polite nod. "Appreciate you having me." She leaned in slightly, flipping through her cue cards. "Now, let's get right into it. Your company recently landed a $250 million government contract, beating out some of the biggest names in tech. That's impressive." Marcus knew this game. Build them up first, make it seem like they respected his achievements. He gave a measured response. "It was a long process, but yeah, we put in the work. We developed a security encryption system that outperformed our competitors. Simple as that." Victoria crossed her legs. "Some have called it groundbreaking," she said, a subtle pause hanging in the air. "But others have raised questions." Marcus didn't flinch. "Questions?" She picked up a card, reading aloud. "Some industry experts say NextGen benefited from certain federal diversity incentives, that companies like yours have an edge in these contracts because agencies are looking to diversify their vendors, that perhaps this wasn't just about being the best, but about meeting a quota." There it was, the real reason he was here. Marcus let a beat pass before he responded. "I've heard that argument before. It's funny, though. When a black entrepreneur wins, it's special treatment. But when a legacy firm run by the same families for generations lands those same deals, nobody questions it." The air in the studio shifted. The producers off-camera glanced at each other. Victoria held her ground. "So you're saying race played no role at all in your success?" Marcus chuckled, shaking his head. Let me ask you this. When SpaceX won its NASA contracts, was it because Elon Musk met a diversity quota? When Jeff Bezos landed government deals for Blue Origin, was it because of his background? Or do we only ask that question when the CEO looks like me? Victoria's expression barely flickered. So you don't believe these diversity programs help? Marcus folded his hands. They help level the playing field. But what people don't realize is the playing field was never level to begin with. But Victoria wasn't done yet. She had something else up her sleeve. Her smile sharpened like a blade hidden in silk. She glanced at her cue cards, then back up at Marcus. Well, Marcus, let's talk about that playing field you mentioned, she said, her tone shifting from polite curiosity to something a little colder. You grew up in Atlanta, Georgia. Single mother, public school, worked your way up from nothing. That's inspiring. Marcus gave a slow nod, sensing where this was going. Victoria continued. But here's what some might wonder. How does someone with no Ivy League background, no deep family connections, go from a struggling neighborhood to securing contracts that billion-dollar corporations fail to land? She let the question hang in the air. The implication was clear. How did you get here? Did someone pull strings? Marcus tilted his head slightly, as if considering his words carefully. It's called work, Victoria. Some of us don't have generational wealth or country club networks to fall back on. So we build from the ground up. Victoria gave a small nod like she was hearing him but wasn't listening. But surely you had help along the way, she pressed. Maybe a mentor, a program? Something that gave you an extra push? Marcus exhaled quietly. Yeah. Help came in the form of working 3 jobs while getting my engineering degree. Help came in the form of sleeping in my office while I built my first software prototype, because I couldn't afford rent. That's the help I got. Her lips pressed together for a fraction of a second. The producers standing behind the cameras were locked in now. Victoria shuffled her cue cards again. And yet, some would argue that black entrepreneurs today have more opportunities than ever before. That programs like affirmative action, minority business grants, and government incentives exist specifically to open doors that weren't open decades ago. Marcus leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees. You know what's funny? When a black business owner succeeds, people always ask what programs helped us, but nobody asks which old money bank helped fund a white-owned startup. Nobody asks which family connections got them into Stanford, or which golf buddy invested in their company. He let that sink in for a second before continuing. The truth is, success isn't handed out in some lottery. People like me had to be twice as good just to get a seat at the table. A noticeable shift filled the room, the quiet tension of an audience realizing they were watching something real unfold. Victoria, however, didn't blink. Instead, she smiled the way a chess player smiles when they think they've just cornered their opponent. That's an interesting perspective, she said, her voice smooth as glass. But let's address another factor. Perception. She turned slightly toward the cameras. Marcus, you present yourself as a self-made success, but let's talk about the public perception of your story. Some say that black entrepreneurs get an unfair advantage when it comes to media attention, that the narrative of overcoming struggle is more marketable than the thousands of white business owners who work just as hard but don't get the same headlines. Marcus let out a quiet chuckle. Oh, so now we get too much attention? Victoria kept her polished smile, but a slight shift in her posture gave her away. She wasn't expecting him to laugh. You're telling me that in a world where 90% of Fortune 500 CEOs are white men, where major tech funding still overwhelmingly goes to white-owned startups, the real issue is that people like me get too much press? Victoria tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. I'm just pointing out that in today's climate, some people feel there's pressure to highlight diversity over pure merit. Marcus exhaled, shaking his head. Merit, right? He glanced briefly at the cameras, then back at her. Let me ask you something, Victoria. Do you really think that if I wasn't exceptional at what I do, I'd be sitting in this chair right now? You think I got here because I played the diversity card? Or do you think I got here despite everything designed to keep me out? The silence in the room was louder than any of her previous questions. But Victoria wasn't done. Not yet. Because she had one last card to play, the one designed to break him. She took a slow breath, shifting in her seat just enough to make it look casual. But Marcus saw it, a crack in the facade. She glanced at her cue cards again, then set them down. This next part, she wanted to deliver directly. Marcus, she said, tilting her head slightly, I think it's fair to say you're passionate about this, and I respect that. But let me ask you something. Marcus gave a slight nod, waiting. Do you think some of this outrage is exaggerated? She paused, letting the words settle. After all, your success story proves that the system isn't as stacked against black entrepreneurs as some claim. The audacity. Marcus could feel the heat creeping up his spine, but he didn't let it show. Instead, he let out a quiet chuckle, shaking his head. You know, he said, his voice measured, it's funny how people love to use one success story as proof that a problem doesn't exist. Victoria's smile stayed put, but something in her eyes flickered. Marcus leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on his knees. Let me put it this way. If one person climbs out of a burning building, do you point at them and say, see, the fire wasn't that bad? Victoria opened her mouth, hesitated, then closed it. Marcus wasn't done. The fact that I made it doesn't mean the system isn't broken. It just means I fought twice as hard to get through it. He let his words settle, the weight of them hanging in the air like a storm waiting to break. Marcus sat in his office, the city skyline stretching out before him like a canvas of endless possibilities. The past 72 hours had been a whirlwind of emotions, reactions, and decisions. Praise, backlash, threats, and opportunities, all swirling around him like a storm he couldn't escape. He thought about his younger self, the kid from Birmingham who had to fight for every inch of success, the one who watched doors shut in his face while others walked through without knocking. And now, here he was, at the center of a national debate he never asked for, but one he couldn't ignore. Tasha entered the room, her expression unreadable. She set a folder on his desk. We just got an offer, she said, her voice steady but with a hint of excitement. Marcus raised an eyebrow. From who? A network, she replied. They want you to do a televised special, a one-on-one deep dive about race, business, and the system. Marcus exhaled, leaning back in his chair. So now they want to listen. Tasha smirked. Seems like it. She paused, then added, What do you want to do? Marcus stared at the folder, his mind racing. He could walk away, let the noise die down, and get back to business as usual. Or he could use this moment, not for clout, not for attention, but to say the things nobody wanted to hear, the things that needed to be said. He picked up the folder, flipping through the proposal. The network was offering him a platform, a chance to control the narrative. But Marcus knew better than to trust them blindly. If he was going to do this, it would be on his terms. Tell them I'll do it, he said finally, setting the folder down. Tasha's eyes widened slightly. You sure? Marcus nodded. Yeah, but on my terms. If the system's going to put me under a spotlight, I'm damn sure going to control the narrative. Tasha smiled, a rare, genuine smile. I'll let them know. As she left the room, Marcus turned back to the window. The city below was alive, bustling with people who had no idea the storm he was about to unleash. His viral moment wasn't just another internet controversy. It was a reckoning. It forced a conversation people had been dodging for decades. About race, about success, about who gets to rise without question and who gets questioned when they rise. Some called him an activist, some called him arrogant, some called him right. But one thing was certain. Nobody could ignore him anymore. The next few days were a blur of preparations. Marcus worked closely with his team to craft the message he wanted to deliver. He wasn't going to let the network spin this their way. He was going to speak his truth, unfiltered and unapologetic. The night of the special arrived. Marcus walked onto the set, the bright lights and cameras a stark contrast to the quiet intensity of his office. He took his seat facing the host, a seasoned journalist known for her tough questions. But Marcus wasn't nervous. He was ready. The interview began, and Marcus didn't hold back. He spoke about the systemic barriers that Black entrepreneurs face, the double standards in corporate America, and the myth of meritocracy. He called out the hypocrisy of a system that celebrates diversity in theory but punishes it in practice. "You want to talk about fairness?" Marcus said, his voice steady but firm. "Then let's start by telling the truth. The truth is, the bar isn't in the same place for everyone. A mediocre white man can fail upwards in this country, but a brilliant black man has to jump through flaming hoops just to get a shot." The host tried to interject, but Marcus wasn't done. "And when we do make it," he continued, "people like you sit across from us and ask if we got here because of some special advantage. No, we got here despite the system, not because of it." The studio was silent, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Marcus knew this moment would send shockwaves across the country, just like his last interview. But this time, he was in control. As the interview wrapped up, Marcus felt a sense of relief. He had said what needed to be said. The rest was up to the world. The special aired that night, and just like before, the internet exploded. Clips of Marcus's impassioned speech were everywhere. Hashtags like Marcus Speaks Truth and System is Rigged trended on Twitter. Cable news anchors debated his points, and opinion pieces flooded every major publication. Some called him brave, others called him angry. But Marcus didn't care. He had started a conversation that couldn't be ignored. Over the next few weeks, Marcus continued to use his platform to push for change. He met with lawmakers, spoke at conferences, and even launched a nonprofit aimed at supporting Black entrepreneurs. The backlash didn't stop. Threats still came, and some clients still pulled out, but Marcus refused to back down. One evening, as he sat in his office, Tasha walked in with a stack of letters. "These came for you," she said, setting them on his desk. Marcus picked up the top letter. It was from a young Black entrepreneur who had been inspired by his story. "Thank you for speaking up," it read. "Because of you, I know I'm not alone in this fight." Marcus smiled, a sense of fulfillment washing over him. This was why he had done it. Not for the fame, not for the clout, but for the people who needed to hear that they weren't alone. As he looked out at the city skyline, Marcus knew this was just the beginning. The system was broken, but it wasn't unfixable. And if he had to be the one to start the conversation, so be it. Because sometimes, rewriting the rules starts with one person daring to speak the truth. And Marcus was ready to rewrite them all.